You don't usually see respected classics and gloriously trashy sci-fi sharing the same list. But every movie here received an X rating at some point. Sometimes it was for explicit content. Either way, they all found their audience and became cult movies. Despite the obvious effort behind it, Flesh Gordon is still, at its core, a very elaborate and very funny skin flick. That's exactly why the MPAA originally slapped the film with an X rating. The producers later had to re-edit it to secure an R rating for wider release. The movie was directed by Michael Benveniste and Howard Zeem, who had grown up watching the old Universal Flash Gordon serials. They wanted to recreate the same swashbuckling sci-fi adventure they loved as kids. Their version keeps the deliberately cheap special effects and the serial-style storytelling, but adds a lot more nudity and sex than the originals ever had. The story closely mirrors the Flash Gordon setup. A hero named Flesh Gordon sets out to save Earth from the evil Emperor Wang, who has built a device called the Sex Ray. The machine turns the entire population into uncontrollable nymphomaniacs, so stopping Wang becomes a matter of planetary survival. The Quatermass Experiment is based on the 1953 BBC television serial written by Nigel Neal. The story begins after the first manned spaceflight returns to Earth. Something has clearly gone wrong. 2 of the 3 crew members are missing, and the only survivor is barely coherent. An alien entity has infected him and plans to release reproductive spores in an attempt to conquer the planet. Professor Bernard Quatermass is the one who tries to stop it. The Quatermass Experiment became only the 12th film in Britain to receive the dreaded X certificate, a rating that had been introduced just 4 years earlier. The X certificate reflected the film's horror elements, including the astronauts' gradual transformation. The film could easily have struggled under that label, but Hammer chose to lean into it. They even dropped the E from experiment in the title to attract the same audience that had been flocking to other X-rated films, including Les Diaboliques, and the strategy paid off. The impact on Hammer was immediate. Until then, the studio had mainly produced crime stories and mystery thrillers. By the following year, 3 of the studio's 4 releases were horror films, including a sequel to this one, and major distributors were suddenly eager to work with them. This is a genuinely perverted movie that will make you blush. Café Flesh is a post-apocalyptic sci-fi and hardcore hybrid, and one of the more absorbing films from that era of adult cinema. The story takes place after a nuclear war that has divided humanity into 2 groups. Most people have become sex negatives, meaning they get very ill if they attempt to have sex. A small minority are sex positives, the only ones still capable of it. To entertain the frustrated majority, the positives perform explicit shows in a club called Café Flesh. When a famous positive performer named Johnny Rico arrives, one woman in the audience begins to question whether she might actually be a positive herself. There is a constant stream of explicit performances in the film, and they rarely stop for long. The result is something openly perverse, yet also oddly thoughtful. Barbarella opens with a famous scene of Jane Fonda floating naked in zero gravity while the opening credits play. The film wastes no time establishing the tone. Nudity, sexual innuendo, and playful provocation are built into the movie from the very first moments. Produced by B-movie icon Dino De Laurentiis, Barbarella adapts a bawdy French comic strip for the big screen. In the story, the sexually adventurous Barbarella travels into deep space to capture the villain Dr. Duran Durand, who has obtained a weapon that could spread destruction across the galaxy. Along the way, she encounters a series of strange alien creatures, many of whom she ends up sleeping with. At one point, Barbarella is captured and placed inside the excessive machine, a device designed to kill its victims through overwhelming sexual pleasure. Instead, her enthusiasm overloads the machine and it short-circuits. Since Barbarella opened in the United States before the MPAA rating system was introduced, it was not given an official X rating there. Instead, it received a condemned rating from the National Catholic Office for Motion Pictures, which described it as a sick, heavy-handed fantasy with nudity and graphic representations of sadism. Over time, however, the film developed a strong cult reputation. It also performed very well in Britain, becoming the second most popular film in general release there in 1968, second only to The Jungle Book. There are good films, there are bad films, and then there are films so strange and conflicted that it's hard to know what to make of them. The Man Who Fell to Earth fits perfectly into that last category. Directed by Nicholas Roeg and starring David Bowie in his first starring film role, it is based on the 1963 novel by Walter Tevis. Bowie plays an alien named Thomas Jerome Newton who arrives on Earth searching for water to save his dying planet. Using his intelligence, he introduces advanced technology and quickly becomes one of the richest men in the world. He forms a relationship with a woman played by Candy Clark and begins building the means to return home. But the longer Newton stays on Earth, the more he becomes corrupted by the same temptations that surround him, eventually sliding into alcoholism and isolation. The film mixes science fiction with surreal and often disturbing imagery, including scenes of full frontal nudity. In the United Kingdom, it was passed uncut by the British Board of Film Censors and received an X rating for adult audiences. Behind the scenes, the production also faced serious problems. Paramount refused to pay for the finished film, claiming it was too different from what the studio expected. British Lion later sued Paramount and received a small settlement. The film ultimately received only a limited release in the United States, and thanks largely to foreign sales, the budget was barely recouped.